Hello everybody, how are you doing? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, where of course we're going to continue to talk about Metroid Dread and the Metroid franchise, and we are going to theorize like crazy today. This is not the first time I've theorized on the channel since the game was announced, but I've got more stuff to say. I've been thinking like crazy about things that this game could actually do or show or tell us about Samus and the franchise, and so I want to continue to dive super deep into the possibilities of Metroid Dread. So in many ways, this video is actually a continuation of a theory video that I released just a few days ago that was really exploring how Metroid Dread is apparently representing the end of this story arc per Sakamoto and Nintendo's quotes, that Metroid Dread, which we know as Metroid 5, which we also know is a direct sequel to Metroid Fusion, is supposed to end the conflict between Samus and the Metroids. These are bold claims. That's a big idea, and there's a lot of exciting but also kind of scary or freaky implications that I think a lot of Metroid fans think of when we hear those quotes. I spent about 15 or so minutes on that video kind of breaking down some of the evidence and quotes that exist out there and what I think it could mean and how I don't really see it as a bad thing. So I absolutely recommend, if you're a Metroid fan and you have not watched my video about that topic, you should watch it. The good thing is you don't really need to watch it before you watch this one, so you can either go and watch it now and come back to this video or finish this video and go back and watch it. That part won't really matter. But the idea we're talking about today, and I'm sure that the title of this video has already kind of clued you into where we're going here, and you're thinking this is a big crazy idea. It very much does build on the idea of Metroid Dread representing the end of this story, and to me, I'm kind of excited to just talk about this. Naturally, before we dive too much deeper into this Metroid Dread theory topic, I like to remind you guys I'm always trying to grow the channel here on Rule of Two Review. I'm hoping to cross 17,000 subscribers before the end of the year. I upload several videos every single week, and I live stream once a week. I cover all things Nintendo. I cover every single little tiny thing about Metroid possible, and I discuss all things gaming. So as you watch this video, if you seem to like what I'm doing and what you hear, then I hope you will consider subscribing to the channel. So boy, oh boy, where do I begin with this crazy topic? Like I said, you could tell from the video title where we're going in this discussion here. And it's the concept of Samus potentially being seen as the last living Metroid by the time this story ends. Now, I know that that is an absolutely banana-sounding idea, but I'm hoping that you're going to hear me out in this video and understand where I'm coming from. Like I said, Sakamoto has been talking about Metroid Dread representing the end of the conflict of Samus and the Metroids. I believe the phrasing that's been being thrown around there is the end of the interconnected fate between Samus and the Metroids. That interconnected fate concept has been a big part of how he's been talking about it and how Nintendo has been translating this message to us that this is really the end of the story. And I discussed the theories on how what I really think that means is they're going to wrap up the story of Samus and the Metroids, or maybe even the X-Parasite, and moving forward after Metroid Dread, the next games that they make, which Sakamoto has confirmed they are making and already working on the next game, is going to focus on some sort of bigger new conflict, and the Metroids themselves, the actual entities that we know as Metroids, will probably finally be defeated and wiped out for all time. The X-Parasite might have something to do with it. The X-Parasite might become the new big bad in some way, or morph into some new evil entity that becomes a threat to the galaxy that Samus has to continue to fight. But if that actually becomes true, then here's the thing. And many people brought this up on the comments of that video or to myself on Twitter and DMs and things like this, is what happens to the series if Metroids are actually wiped out and extinct, but the games continue to go on? You know, and we're going to do this continuing on the theory that Samus lives, because some people talk about Samus maybe dies in Metroid Dread. In no way do I think that will happen. As I said in that last video, Samus is too valuable to Nintendo for them to kill her off, but still try to continue on the concept of this franchise. It just makes no sense. So you're never going to convince me that Samus will die or retire when this game's end. She's absolutely going to continue to live on and be the star of future games. And so what happens to the title of this franchise? This is what really sparked this idea in me is if Metroids are gone and dead, how could you call the franchise Metroid going forward? Would they call it, Samus? Would they call it The Adventures of Samus, something something for all future titles? And doesn't that sound weird? Won't it be confusing? And I agree with that. I'm like, that's not really the best thing to do. I don't think it's going to help them to call the series anything but Metroid going forward. So how do they find a way to still call it Metroid if the Metroids are wiped out? And that's when I realized Samus is going to end up being seen as the last living Metroid when this story concludes. Now, if you're a Metroid fan who knows the lore and the story, you probably already know where I'm going with this. And this all has to do with the most directly preceding game that takes place right before Dread. The last time we had a new game in the new timeline, which was Metroid Fusion, Metroid 4 in 2002, and in that game, which again is the direct prequel to Metroid Dread, something crazy happens to Samus. In the beginning opening prologue to that game, she basically ends up getting infected both with the brand newly discovered X-Parasite and a Metroid vaccine. This is a huge deal that the story has not had a chance to really kind of continue to discuss and deliver on since that game. And I think that part of the reason some people maybe forget about that is because it was literally 19 years ago that Metroid 4 came out, and since then, other games have released. Metroid Prime games, Federation Force spin-offs, Other M, Samus Returns Remake. I mean, all these other Metroid games have released, but the story has not truly moved forward since 2002's Metroid Fusion. And so there's been no reason for Nintendo or the Metroid franchise to have to discuss the outcome of these events. But these events are huge, and obviously we're spoiling it here, but she becomes infected with the X-Parasite. In trying to remove her suit, the GFS realize that it's going to kill her if they do it, and so they need to leave the X-infested, or at least parts of the X-infested suit on her. But how do they keep her alive and combat the X-Parasite? They develop a vaccine that's made out of Metroid DNA because Metroids are the only thing in the universe that can combat and destroy the X-Parasite. And so they inject that into Samus, which keeps her alive, changes the suit, which seems to also still be kind of morphed and connected to her. And so she's literally Samus, the human woman, who's got part Chozo DNA, also has a suit attached to her skin infected with X-Parasite, and also has been injected with a Metroid DNA vaccine. I mean, holy crap, there's so much going on there with her. Samus is a completely changed woman by the time the events of Metroid Fusion play out and conclude. And so now that we're finally going to see what happens after that, we kind of have a whole new Samus. Yes, we've all been talking about the suit she's wearing in Metroid Dread, and it kind of looks like the Fusion suit, but different or changed. But I think focusing on the suit might be less important. I'm focused on the person. I'm focused on the woman and the human inside of that suit and what's happened to her. She has X-Parasite and Metroid DNA and genes and just living force energy within her. And so we know that Metroids have kind of technically already been wiped out. There are no more Metroids, right, by the time Metroid Dread begins. And so how can the story still be called Metroid? Instead, we know Samus is going to be fighting and combating the Emmy robots. We don't yet know exactly how the GFS is involved, other than that it seems that they sent her to the planet ZDR to find out what's happening with the Emmy robots. The Emmy robots there, of course, to extract X DNA. And so all of this GFS, X-Parasite, Metroid, Samus, Emmy stuff going on tells me that she is at the center of it, and she is the only living person still with anything Metroid as a part of her DNA. And so the whole concept of this theory just has to do with when I envisioned the way Metroid Dread is going to end, and I'm finally seeing the credits roll for the first time, and I've seen this story and this journey of Samus through to its conclusion, I feel like we will have seen, again, all Metroids are clearly going to be wiped out of existence. The X-Parasite will either also be completely defeated or will have somehow turned itself into some new ongoing threat that will become the new main threat and conflict of the galaxy for the future games after Dread. But then we're going to be left with Samus. And if there are no more Metroids, but we still have Samus who has Metroid DNA within her, I feel that the events of Metroid Dread and something about maybe the journey that Samus goes on will actually make or strengthen that Metroid DNA component within her. Obviously, it's up to the story to really do this and deliver this idea to us, but I feel like that aspect of her is going to become so important, maybe the thing keeping her alive, that in a sense, she's both a human and also a Metroid. And so she becomes the last living Metroid, and it is so ironic for so many reasons, not the least of which is the beginning of Super Metroid, which, picking off the events of the end of Metroid 2, tells us that the last Metroid is in captivity, the galaxy is at peace. So at one point, there was a last living Metroid, which was at the beginning of Super Metroid. And obviously a lot has happened between the events of Super Metroid and Other M and Metroid Fusion to get us to Metroid Dread, including getting that Metroid DNA into Samus. Again, it all comes back to that last Metroid from Metroid 2 and Super Metroid, and that DNA vaccine that was injected into Samus, and she becomes the last person alive keeping the Metroid DNA going, which means for all the future games after Dread, even though the Metroids will be extinct, Samus is going to be the last Metroid. And so, as ironic and goofy as it sounds, we can actually call Samus Metroid. Like I said, I know how ironic and silly it is, because for decades we've all joked about the series being called Metroid, but it stars a woman named Samus, and people thinking that Samus was this guy named Metroid, right? Obviously, we think of the "why can't Metroid crawl" meme as well, which is just a hilarious thing. And you know, it's the whole idea of like The Legend of Zelda is about a guy named Link. The Metroid franchise is about a woman named Samus. Do you call Link Zelda? Do you call Samus Metroid? I mean, no, because you know who they are. But I actually think that there's a chance that the story of Metroid Dread is going to kind of flip that idea on its head and, in a sense, make it kind of true. Of course, Samus's name won't become Metroid, but I think Samus might be the living thing in the galaxy that continues the DNA and the lineage and the blood and the line of Metroids, because she is part Metroid. It's a crazy bananas idea. Remember this. If you've watched this, scratching your head thinking I'm crazy, don't forget that I told you at the beginning of this video, I know how bananas it sounds. But it just makes sense. Sakamoto is telling us that Metroid Dread ends the conflict between Samus and the Metroids, but he also tells us they're working on the next games. I don't think they're going to continue this franchise with Samus of the Star, but just not call it Metroid anymore. It doesn't make sense. And they have a perfectly handwritten, served on a silver platter idea to keep the title of Metroid in this franchise and carry the idea forward. And it's the Metroid DNA that's inside of Samus now. This happened in the most direct game, okay? They haven't been ignoring this, it's just that they haven't told the sequel to Metroid Fusion until now. This is their chance and their opportunity to do so, and so, obviously I could be wrong, but I feel like I'm onto something, you guys. I feel good about this, so in a couple of months we'll find out if I'm crazy, but for now, I think Metroid Dread will end with Samus being the last living Metroid. So now is the fun part and the crazy part, and the part that I'm a little bit scared of, which is to see how you guys react to this theory, if any of this makes sense. I know I feel like I've been like a crazy tinfoil hat wearing screaming conspiracy theorist in this video here, just all over the place, passionate about this theory. But as I've thought about it since I made that video about the end of the story, I'm like, this just makes too much sense, you know? So it's nothing more than an idea. I'm not telling you to go to Vegas and place money on this being true. I'm just a super fan of the franchise who cares about the lore and the story and the journey of Samus as a person. And this just all kind of adds up in my head. I mean, when you track the events of Super Metroid and Metroid Other M, and I know everyone hates that game, but you can't ignore it, it matters. Super Metroid, Metroid Other M, and Metroid Fusion, and you consider what I said today, you consider Sakamoto's quotes about the end of the story, but they're working on the next game anyway, tell me that there isn't some kernel of truth to this idea that I've laid out. That the Metroid DNA inside Samus, which has not been addressed since 2002's Fusion, can't possibly play some sort of integral role on this story of Dread and the future of the franchise after it. I think it's going to happen, man. So this is my tinfoil hats conspiracy theory, but I do feel pretty good about it. Tell me what you guys think, man. Oh boy, am I nervous, but I also am excited to hear what you guys say. Do you think there's any truth to it? Do you think I'm crazy? Do you think I'm onto something? Whatever you feel, talk about it below. And with that, this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and I will catch you next time on another video.